So today, friends, we are going to have a look at a true believer. Yes, a Brexit true believer, for they do still exist and are still out there pumping out that, guys, you just don't understand. Brexit can work. It really, really can. Trust me, if only they would listen to us and do as we said. You've got to do all this deregulation. And of course, when you go to these people and you say, well, okay, what form of deregulation do you want to do? And they get vague. They get very vague. Currently, when you hear this, as we'll be hearing in a moment, it's all about, it's supply side reform. Supply side reform. If only we would do the supply side reforms, it would achieve something and Brexit would work. But this is it. You now have to ask, well, what do you mean when you say supply side reforms? You may remember just a couple of days ago, we went over the blog from 1828, I believe it was, a very, very, very free market fundamentalist website, essentially, that said, look, one of the biggest Brexit opportunities was to go and just, get rid of the NHS and just privatize it. And yet they didn't. And yet that's the goal of certainly many, shall we say, still of these Brexit true believers. As was the case back in 2016, as is now still the case, they do not want to admit what they really want to do, which is turn the UK into the Singapore on the Thames, be a low regulation, low tax economy. No one in their right mind in the UK wants this for the UK, but these Brexiteers do, and they know it. So they have to do it by stealth. This was why the Brexit campaign was incredibly wide, said, we'll stay in the single market customs union. And then when they won, they went, right, we have to go as hard as we can. And they've never stopped since. It has been full gas on the pedal to the metal, all gas, no brakes. Even now, they are worried that Rishi Sunak is about to sort of maybe put on the brakes just a bit. And if you saw Question Time last night, you had a guy who I think he's in the wine merchant industry for like over 30 years and completely eviscerated Jacob Rees-Mogg. And the funny part was he, as he said himself, was a lifelong Conservative member. So this idea that is now really starting to sink in, which we've been talking about a lot recently, is that people are starting to realize these benefits that the Brexiteers espoused continuously about how wonderful, how amazing Brexit was going to be, isn't happening. And when you promised, as they did, something almost that incredible, that dramatic, people catch on. People are catching on. And I'll tell you what, it's happening a lot quicker than some of us on like the Remain side even predicted. So that's really good. But today we're not going to talk about that. We're going to go, as we said, into some true believer territory. So hold on to your hats. This is going to be fun. So before we do go diving into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. And of course, down below as well, there's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there's the Pony Club as well. You can join too. So over we go to the Telegraph with their piece on this of Brexit could still be a goldmine for the Chancellor if only he would harness it, which is what the Brexiteers have been saying for years. Remember, their golden opportunity, as they proclaimed, was Liz Truss. Liz Truss was going to do everything they ever dreamed of possible for being Brexit. And of course, the second she starts to do it, the markets go, what are you doing? And of course, she lasted 44 days in office. It could have potentially been even shorter had the Queen not died. So bear that in mind. But anyway, let's get into this. So, having rejected growth and instead chosen austerity as the government's economic policy, no doubt the Chancellor is casting around for opportunities to stimulate supply side economics. Again, this is the new buzzword that they've really sort of latched onto. The government has announced their intention to deregulate aspects of financial services, presumably taking advantage of opportunities of Brexit. And in principle, this should be good news, even though many of the measures do appear to be subject to review or to be scheduled to arrive later. As with so much of this government does, it is shackled by provocation. So, again, most of the stuff that the Chancellor's announced recently, we've been over, it's not good. It essentially does a lot of the laws, rules, and regulations that came, of course, in the wake of the 2008 financial crash, which was essentially to prevent banks doing what they did, which, well, led to the 2008 financial crash. But anyway, back to it. To the financial services sector, including banking, insurance, and support services such as legal and accountancy, were identified several years ago by the EY as one of the two sectors in which the UK has a comparative advantage. The other sector was executive industries, which extractive industries, which successive governments have done their best to destroy on the crusade to net zero, notwithstanding the recent permission given by Mr. Grove to create a new coal mine in Cumbria. Again, of course, they don't seem to understand that public pressure, essentially public perception, is very, very much for net zero, for having and creating a greener future and creating these new greener industries. Clearly, they are not learning the lesson, which was told to them quite a long time ago by the Australian Conservative Party, who went, yeah, because we didn't do anything about net zero, because we were net zero skeptics, like this guy clearly is. Just from that sentence alone, I can tell this guy's a net zero skeptic. We lost heavily. So, guys, maybe you should take net zero more constructively and, maybe engage with it. And clearly, the Conservative Party, the message has not sunk into the Conservative Party. But anyway, back to it. So, the financial services have a special place in the UK economy, but it is important to view the sector as part of a larger whole. A sector which would have been viewed historically as serving and facilitating the rest of the economy, now seen as a generator of its wealth in its own right. And that is part of the problem. It is not seen as a larger whole. The economic engine in itself is just the financial services sector located in London. And because previous governments have just focused on that, they have let the rest of the economy just go to pot. And this has had huge implications for the rest of the country. This is why you get so many people who were complaining in 2019, which Boris Johnson latched onto, of feeling left behind. So he is just advocating something which will just accelerate and even turbocharge this feeling. You cannot just focus on just London. But once again, as we said, you bring in sort of leveling up. The Tories didn't follow through on it because they have no interest in following through on it. So back to it. Right. So the whole financial services sector is a greater proportion of GDP than manufacturing, yet no deregulation of the remainder of the economy has been forthcoming. The city has been given special treatment because they don't want to deregulate those other sectors, because it would then make it harder and to trade with Europe, and it's already hard enough. It will basically, in some cases, if you deregulate the economy, unless those manufacturers continue to follow those rules, make it harder. And then, of course, you've got a massive problem because we've deregulated. We might get a ton of cheap products from the rest of the world just start flooding in, meaning that they can't compete in their own local market, which will cause even bigger problems. Bear in mind, manufacturing has shrunk 4% this year. It's a big problem. But anyway, continue with it. The trigger report on the regulatory reform concession by Boris Johnson as Prime Minister focused almost exclusively on financial services. The so-called Big Bang 2.0 appears to have been watered down in comparison with the proposition that was proposed by Kersey Quitang as Chancellor, a retreat from the growthonomics offered in the mini budget. So again, like I say, this guy is not just a Brexit true believer, he was a Truss true believer as well, by the looks of it. Even though, well, the markets severely disagreed. Even most of the other Conservative Party very, very much disagreed as well. So, and obviously, back to it, consisted with the fact that the Sunak-Hunt alliance, along with their cheerleaders in sectors of the press, continue to blame the mini budget for the impending economic downturn, when it is in fact the Hunt budget that has been met with dismay and the mismanagement of the Bank of England that has sparked the negative market reaction. Again, don't blame the mini budget that, started all this. Don't blame the mini budget, because that was fine. That was fine, guys. Nothing was wrong with the mini budget. Like I say, I told you this is some true believer territory we're entering into. But anyway, let's carry on with this. So, a practical alleviation of the burden of red tape for both businesses and consumers would be liberalizing the massive overkill of GDPR rules and those related to money laundering, which apply to the whole population. 99% of whom must be unlikely to require the nanny state to manage their affairs, and certainly are not the criminals and rules are seeking to ensnare. So, if you get rid of GDPR, and we've been over this, I work in marketing where GDPR is pretty much the predominant guidepost by how all we work. If you get rid of GDPR, and let's say, have a customer in Europe, I have to follow GDPR rules. I cannot get out of it. If I want to work with someone in Europe, I have to follow GDPR. If we do not, then not only is it 10 times harder for me to get a customer from Europe, but I cannot handle any data any European data if I do not follow GDPR rules. And then, of course, money laundering. Oh, don't worry, guys. It's fine. Money laundering rules are only to catch the criminals. It's not like, people money launder all the time. Again, most of the money laundering is done by very, very wealthy individuals who do this a lot by scapegoating the rules. It's not money laundering. I'm just moving my money to an offshore bank account. Again, we'll continue. So, yeah, let's say true believer territory. So, at the other end of the spectrum of the proposed reforms is the separation of retail and commercial banking, with the proposed to alleviate this for smaller banks. Certainly, the small private banks, which are naturally curious or even had unlimited liability, were unfairly oppressed by the post-crash rules, but care must be taken. And again, bear in mind, it was the small banks. It was the small banks that suffered most. I mean, I'm pretty sure people remember the whole Northern Rock fiasco and what happened there. Although I can't remember if I can't remember fully off the top of my head with Northern, not all the full affair of Northern Rock, but yeah, I'm pretty sure Northern Rock was like certainly one of the big headline victims, of course, if you remember back in the sort of the post 2008 sort of crash. So anyway, continue. The city will always push the boundaries to the limit, and the separation of retail and commercial banking activity was introduced for good reasons after the 1929 crash. So this is so stupid, because he's admitting here that banks are going to push the limit. So should we not put, or at least make sure there are regulations in place so that they are not pushing that limit? Yeah, honestly, words fail. Back to it. So the removal of this separation, driven by President Clinton and eagerly pursued by the UK, by the Blair Brown administration, in order to provide the golden egg, set the scene for the 2007-2008 crash. Again, to say more than just that happened really in the 2008 crash. But of course, most people, again, he's trying to desperately, as you can see, 2008 crash had nothing to do with deregulation. It was all Brown and Blair and Brown's fault. They're the ones who caused the 2007-2008 crash. Just ignore everything else that went on and the whole reviews, the reports that all came out in the wake of that crash. Just ignore that, guys. Ignore that. So, in reality, the greatest opportunities for deregulation and therefore the stimulators of a growth economy lie amongst the 4,000 or so EU derived instruments that are left over from our membership. Of course, he's referring to that particular bill going through Parliament, but of course, we've been through that multiple times. If you get rid of all those rules, you can blow huge holes in the UK statute book for laws and regulations, just huge laws, because we have built on top of EU regulations with our own stuff. And if you suddenly pull out those EU blocks, down can come tumbling the Jenga tower. We have seen from legal experts that you would create massive legal black holes in tons of regulations. And here's the thing. There's a lot of people going around that have suspected, because initially 4,000 wasn't the number. It was about 2,000. Those extra ones have been added since, looking through. And there are a lot of people who work in those sectors that say there are actually a whole lot more rules and regulations that should be added. So in fact, that 4,000 number is potentially even bigger than that. So you can see the chaos of what could happen. We've talked about that in detail in other videos, so I'm not going to go too deep into it here. So back to it. This is the real test for a post-Brexit administration, since the cumulative effect of those is a dead hand upon enterprise, and some are hugely costly. But it will take courage to sunset those rules, given that every regulation has its champions. Courage is in short supply in the political arena. The Independent Business Network of Family Business, which I chair, is producing a report setting out the opportunities for deregulation, and there is no excuse for this Tory government not to pursue these policies that will boost growth. Again, what regulations are you talking about specifically? You notice here, once again, every time we come to these talks about regulations, the opportunities for these regulations, what exactly are these regulations you want to get rid of? Now, he did mention some, obviously, in the financial stuff, but like I say, we've been through some of these stuff about that very recently with the whole banking stuff that they want to get rid of. And again, he's not really being honest about the whole reasons those regulations do exist. Same for those, oh, yes, we can get rid of these 4,000 laws because, oh my God, they're so burdensome. Oh, we've got to get rid of them. Okay, what? What one specifically do you want to get rid of? And of course, bear in mind, this guy, of course, is a, John Longworth, is the entrepreneur and chairman of the Independent Business Network for Family Businesses. And of course, he's the former Director General of the British Chamber of Commerce and Brexit Party, and then Conservative MEP. So you can see, as we said before, like I say, this is tiptoeing into the garden of these guys who are still dreaming of this, golden era. And like I say, bear in mind, we've got to show that these guys were completely wrong, that the ideas they really were pushing were not something they want to speak about in open. This is why, again, I think highlighting these guys when they do write this stuff, pointing out the fact that they are being very, very vague when they come to talking about regulations, because they never get into specifics. While there is talk of stuff again about what Rishi Sunak did, of course, he should have gone far deeper, far more, and done more. Like what? What perchance do regulations do you want to get rid of? But of course, as we've said in the past, when it comes to talks about regulation, there is always a reason most of these regulations do indeed exist. And most of the reasons you look at these regulations are because, companies were, cutting corners, taking risks, and making, hundreds of millions off these regulations not being there. And of course, very often it was to the detriment of customers and consumers that they were doing so mainly for their shareholders and even the owners of the business that were completely raking it in. Like I say, much of the Brexiteers' time and attention at the moment does seem to be focused on the deregulation drive. So I fully expect, certainly in the Conservative manifesto, to be a large portion, certainly dedicated to deregulation. Whether they will be vague, I highly suspect they will, because they will not want to talk about sort of the stuff they want to get rid of. Remember when Kersey Tang was business secretary, and he openly made a push to get rid of the EU Working Time Directive. This, of course, would allow employers to basically go, well, at the moment you can only work this so many hours a week. However, we're going to put it into the contract that if we want you to work overtime, you don't get a choice. If we want to suddenly say, well, okay, now you're going to work an extra 5 hours this evening, or something like that. Like I say, employers will do that. There are many, many examples of, before this, reform sort of came in, of employers doing just that. And of course, what happened? There was a massive public backlash against it, and of course, it very quickly got put to bed. This has again showed that if they do want to get rid of regulation, which is the whole point of this whole Brexit reform bill, like I say, we've been into it in other videos, please, please, please do write to your MP, regardless of whatever they are, write to them, say, please do not pass this bill. This is an absolutely awful bill. Like I say, we've gone into it in other videos, so go watch those. Remind them this is an awful bill. But the whole point of that bill is to get rid of as many regulations as they possibly can, because they know that they aren't going to get rid of them all. But if they can get rid of enough, that will be satisfying for them, because most of this regulation that we really looking at, and especially in this bills, has taken years to get to this stage, to get it in, to get it on the books. And if you push it back, you are pushing these rights, rules, regulations, and reforms back decades, potentially. And it could take just as long to get some of those protections put back in. So this is why it is so important to pay attention to that bill, and where this bill even goes. But like I say, as always, we're keeping an eye on it. No potential movement on it yet. I'm hoping, to be honest, that this bill just gets completely put on ice. But we'll see what happens. I don't think there's going to be any movement on it now, potentially until the new year, but we'll see. So, as always, guys, like I say, thank you very much for watching. As always, please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a motivation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, we'll see you all next time.